All right, welcome to our Mochi Podqast, the only podcast rated R for Robin. Today, for my guest, I have the co-founder of Hyperlink Academy, Jared Pereira. Jared, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me. Hello.
So, how's it going?
Pretty good. I'm a bit of a night owl, so we're kind of waking up at 11:20 a.m., but otherwise going pretty well.
Yeah, my day started off really weird with like a trip for ice cream in a almost starting to rain weather with the dog, and it was quite an up and down experience.
Did you get the ice cream in the end?
Yeah, I got like a mango strawberry waffle cone thing.
So,
And I got to try some like weird, like funky cheese ice cream.
interesting.
Yeah, it was like stank as regular cheese, but like cold.
That sounds unpleasant. Yeah.
It definitely was not the best ice cream I've ever had. You know, you hear
Mango
playing.
raspberry's a good combo.
Say again?
Mango and raspberry sounds good enough to make up for that experience. So.
Mhm. What would you say is your favorite kind of ice cream? Let's start off on a off question.
I'm a big fan of mango flavors in general.
Mhm.
I'll go for like mango flavored most anything as one of my top instances of that.
It's a really good default.
Yeah,
It's way better than like the cherry or the watermelon.
100%. And mangoes are just like delicious. That goes for I'll just eat mangoes too. If I can get them. So yeah.
All right.
Favorite fruit as well.
So, co-founder of Hyperlink Academy, can you talk a little bit about what that is?
Yeah, sure. So the way we try to describe it is as a learning platform and internet school. So it's both a collection of tools and infrastructure that we're making to make learning online with people easier, and also a specific instance of people creating learning structures and learning together. That's the school part of it. And so we started last year in June, and this kind of came out of previous work I've been doing in peer-to-peer learning and conversations I've been having with Brendan and Celine, co-founders. And the basic motivation was just trying to come up with something that we could create now, then, that would be immediately useful. There are a lot of ideas in education and in learning structures that, this is more from my experience than like general terms, that were very interesting and theoretically exciting, but were very removed from people actually doing things and learning together. And so the impetus for Hyperlink was very much, what can we do right now that would create a meaningful movement in the direction we want to go to, and specifically how people learn with the internet.
And so is it specifically towards like web development stuff? Is it like learning how to program within the blockchain space? Is it about like smart contracts?
Not really. So subject matter, we don't have like a specific subject matter focus. We do have a kind of vibe that attracts similar courses for the school side of things, that we haven't put a lot of effort into explicitly defining it, just because it works, right? People see what's there and kind of associate the things with each other, but it's something along the lines of like internet liberal arts. So things like programming, design, writing, we got a lot of weird ones. We got some museum conservation ones. We have one course creator who's really doing a lot of interesting things with linguistics and linguistics courses and learning that online. So there's a pretty broad range of it, and that's one of the things that's. So, like the name suggests, we're really interested in the relationships between different things, right? Hyperlinks, the connections between the way your knowledge, the knowledge of a course, of your peers, of your facilitator, all this kind of stuff. And so we had to thread this really fine line when we're kind of setting the constraints of the initial thing, such that it's diverse enough that those relationships are interesting, but coherent enough that those relationships are interesting, so that the courses we're doing and that the classes that are going on are all in the same like neighborhood of concept space, but are still distinct enough that they're the connections between them can play out in interesting ways. And that's kind of like the phase we're just getting into. We've really been in the ground, setting up the initial stuff where we're just building that collection of people, collection of courses, building out our infrastructure. And now like the next phase of the project is A, making it a lot easier to create things. Right now it's very closed. And then B, making it a lot easier to create relationships between things. If that makes sense.
What's the general like course structure like? What's like the learning schedule supposed to be for the person who like enrolls in it?
So it's interesting. We came into it with very few. We don't really impose a specific structure, right? But there is a kind of grain of the infrastructure we've done that points people towards a particular thing. And so the archetype is essentially a like 4 to 6 week course with one live session a week that has asynchronous discussion and resource sharing happening on a forum. So you'll meet once for an hour or two. There'll be some combination of like doing things together and discussing things that have previously gone on. And then you will take the things that happen during those live sessions and interact over the forum instance that we've put together during the week and repeat. It definitely does vary. We have some courses that are like way more synchronous focused and some that are pure async. No one ever meets up, but that's the general archetype. Our kind of hypothesis is we run this thing called a meta course, which is just like the course creation course, right? So if someone is interested in putting something together, the first step would be they go through the meta course. And that structure is very similar to the archetypical structure is basically the meta course structure. And so there's this one hypothesis is that people, while they are creating courses, sort of default to the structure that they're in, right? The most available example. And so one of the things we're thinking about now is if we want people to branch out and start experimenting more, how do we make the meta course more experimental? What can we?
So it's kind of like it's kind of like when you like in like college, it's like the first like the big gen ed class where you have everybody from like a bunch of different disciplines and they're just kind of like learning how to like write and do research, and then eventually everybody's gonna kind of go off and like you're gonna be studying art, you're gonna be studying business, you're gonna be studying like biology or whatever. Yeah,
the meta course is for not everybody in the platform. It's just for the people who are going to be sort of creating learning structures right now. Right. So in our case, we call them facilitators. And so the medium term vision is to definitely have anyone kind of creating that. And that's part of what I said when I like making it easier to create a course. So removing that kind of barrier to entry that is the meta course. But right now that's how it's functioning.
So is there some sort of like credentialing that happens at the completion of do you get to send them like an over expensive piece of paper and have them take pictures and throw hats?
Yeah, so I spent a very long time like obsessed with credentials. Not in the sense that like I was obsessed with getting them myself, but in creating a new way of doing credentials that made more sense for the kinds of learning structures I wanted to see. And that was the work I was doing at Consensus for the whole time I was there. And so with Hyperlink, maybe a little bit of a knee-jerk reaction, but we're very explicitly not doing credentials for the initial period of the project. It's definitely something we'll do eventually, but there's sort of a set of criteria that we're looking for in the state of the network that will point to when we think it's ready for credentialing experiments. And before that point, it's sort of intentionally credentialless.
Interesting.
Yeah. This is part of what I was talking about earlier with the kind of like theoretical versus real learning going on thing, where the credentialing ideas I had and the big project there, Fathom, kind of never materialized in any meaningful way because I didn't like instantiate it in the real world. It was all these kind of like spent way too much time thinking about the theoretical properties of the ideal credentialing system, and way less time thinking about how do you actually grow a network, how do you actually get people learning together. And so Hyperlink is very much like coming from the opposite direction, right? Starting with how do we get people learning together? How do we make that a rich environment? And then once that environment has reached a certain stage of maturity, how do we grow credentials within it? And we'll be using a lot of the ideas that were part of Fathom, which was the project. They'll probably look pretty different because Fathom was designed for assumptions, specifically like security assumptions.
Well, what's Fathom?
Yeah, so Fathom was the project I was working on at Consensus. That was a decentralized credentialing protocol. So basically a tool for taking a community of people who all have some relationship to a subject or a set of subjects, and having them go through a protocol to issue credentials, essentially, and defining that protocol so that it can function really effectively without a central authority dictating like what it means to know a particular thing, or how someone gets tested for it,
or be properly certified and like recertified whenever new information with something comes out.
Yeah, and so like how can you make that process work without those kind of centralized assumptions, just based on the set of peers who are involved in the community, who are involved in like doing the thing that you want to create a credential for.
Yeah, it's really interesting, just like your approach to how people are going to be like learning stuff kind of going forward. Like I was thinking about this. I was talking about this with my wife, how kind of education is getting away from just like the tradition of like, oh, this is how we learned it, this is what we learned in school, and like with super outdated books, and like even the like 8 to 3 time schedule, and the amount of homework people would regularly be scheduled for stuff is just not really the most effective way. And like as people are doing more studies and they're using more data to actually kind of drive policy and drive changes in education, like it just is so shocking to hear about like my younger sisters like using tablets and stuff in their classrooms. And I remember like back when they first implemented the smart TVs or smart boards, nobody knew how to fucking use them, but they had them in every classroom.
Yeah, there's definitely like, I don't know, the rate of technology adoption in like formal education, especially K through 12, definitely seems to be going up. What's disappointing to me about the vast majority of like ed tech kind of initiatives is that they sort of don't leverage technology to engage with the fundamental structures of learning institutions. Right there, how do we use laptops to deliver course material, or like how do we use a web-based platform to have students collaborate with other students or something like that, but they're not really engaging with the things that happen when you sort of, so the ways that you can reconfigure the entire structure when you have access to computers, right? Which is a pretty, they're a novel enough thing that it makes sense that you probably could, but we sort of haven't.
Well, there's also like the logistical difficulties of like making sure that everybody has, good enough internet and access to a computer.
I mean, absolutely, yeah. I don't think on the flip side, right? There, like a lot of there definitely isn't like there's the famous like one laptop per child project that kind of boomed and then flopped. Which I think for various reasons, but it's definitely not a like this idea that you can just like give kids computers and they'll be learning and it's fine. There's a whole host of social and contextual issues that matter a lot more.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but it is, I think, even in the context of those limitations, the application of computers to learning has been significantly, in my opinion, underexplored.
Mm-hmm. What's your educational background?
I graduated high school and then basically immediately started working at Consensus.
Oh, wow.
That was kind of the pathway for me. I decided in my junior year of high school that I didn't want to go to university. And so kind of negotiated about a year's worth of leeway for my parents, where I had that time to kind of make the set of things that I wanted to work on happen.
So how did you make that step? Did you like you went from high school, did you like directly just apply to Consensus right after? Did you do like a year of like, professional development or something?
So I got really obsessed with this education stuff in my junior year of high school, and specifically in like building new educational systems.
So that means you either loved it or you hated school.
Yeah,
there's no in between there.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I think like most people, I was extremely frustrated with the assumptions of the system that I was in, right? Like the things that were expected of me and the things that I would do. I think specifically the like so both the educational opportunities afforded to me in like the present moment, the classes that I could take, things that I could do, and then also the expected next steps. Right? Going to college just seemed like a very limited purview for like the things that I wanted to do.
Where did you study, or where'd you go to school?
So I grew up moving around a little bit. So I was born in Muscat, Oman, and then my family moved around the Middle East for a little bit. And when I was 10, we moved to Nairobi, Kenya. And I basically like did the majority of my like conscious schooling there. So like 11 to 17 or something. And then left in my senior year of high school. And we moved back to Dubai, and I graduated from high school in Dubai. But like the place that probably had the most impact on how I view schooling and education was the school in Nairobi. But yeah, I mean, I honestly like I wasn't the like kind of kid who hated school or anything like that. I definitely like didn't love it, but I especially so I don't know. There was I think a fairly consequential point where I kind of leaned into. Did we lose connection here?
I'm still good.
Oh, okay, yeah. Where I kind of like essentially realized that the goals of the system I was in were not my goals. If I just stuck to my goals, I'd have a much better time. That was when I kind of like just around junior year, and yeah, after that, I think enjoyed school. Because I could kind of get what I want out of it and work the system that way. And yeah, that was
so how did you get connected with Consensus then? Did you like
So at the time that I was getting into thinking about education more broadly and reconfiguring education, I was also getting into like Bitcoin and Ethereum and all these decentralized systems. IPFS was, I think, my first real entryway into it, and sort of falling down that rabbit hole. And there seemed in my mind a really explicit connection between like thinking about new infrastructure for organizing people to learn and seeing these new pieces of infrastructure for, coordinating money, data, systems broadly. And so I was essentially, while thinking about the education stuff, came to the conclusion that credentialing was the point of leverage that made the most sense, the like place that you could use to affect the most change to the entire system. And then so started thinking about credentialing systems, specifically started thinking about how to use Ethereum to make new credentialing systems, right? Taking this idea, you were seeing all these consensus-based things pop up on Ethereum. The early Augur project was like a very big inspiration, and thinking about how could you make a like credential oracle on Ethereum. And yeah, this must have been like late 2015. Yeah. And so then after I graduated, or yeah, that summer, I went to DevCon 2 in Shanghai, and I met, it was like absolutely insane for me. That was the first time I sort of...
You drove to Shanghai?
Like, no, not drove.
Yeah.
Shanghai, that would be insane.
Holy fuck. How many countries did you have to go through to get there?
Like at least 3 on the way up through Africa, and like, I don't know, I'd estimate like 10 to 15 on the way through. Middle East.
I don't imagine getting visas for that would be a very...
Oh yeah.
Oh, I'm just road tripping, man. I gotta get to this thing.
But yeah, so I like turned up to DevCon. I was trying to find people to talk to about this kind of stuff.
Were you already like connected with anybody before then? Were you like you just kind of went on your own?
Yeah,
Wow.
I just kind of turned up. I'd like talked to, I think, a couple of people on like IRC, but like not enough to know who they were or anything like that. Yeah, I just turned up, and I walked around with a sign on my back that said like, ask me about my decentralized education project or something like that, to get people to bring it up.
Bold.
And people did, and I mean, that was after like the first day of 3, and like I'm not necessarily the most social person, and especially like I was like 18 and didn't really know how to, you know, like approach people and talk to them and all that kind of stuff. And so
I guarantee you that approach works also with like, you know, trying to pick up women. Just wear a shirt. Ask me about my educational experiment.
Yeah. I mean,
so what is it?
It worked out. Yeah.
Okay. What would you say is probably like what the more fundamentally like broken things with like the way the current system works, I guess, in credentialing?
So the big issue with credentialing is that the incentives of the credential issuers, I think, are misaligned with the best outcome for all the system's participants, right?
So you're talking about like the university's incentives to like universities' incentives, or like bar association, or like all these guys, their incentives to like kind of keep it either niche or keep it like much more prestigious. Is misaligned with like the goals or the objectives of the students or the people seeking certification.
Yeah, so if we think about credentialing like broadly, right, the goal here is, in my mind, to communicate something about people, right? And that doesn't necessarily mean any kind of factual information. It can communicate purely like social information, that this person is part of this club, or things like that. The credentials exist across that entire spectrum. And
essentially like membership badges, really.
Yeah, but like they carry with them some information, essentially, right? And with the set of credentials, and there's a couple different ingredients that like go into conveying that meaning. There's like what it actually means, your trust in the credential itself, and the like trust in both the authenticity and the validity of the credential. So like, if someone presents this to you, can you be sure that it actually is the credential that they are presenting? Can you be sure that the credential means what it says it means? And the set of things people can communicate with credentials currently is just extremely limited because of the both the cost of issuing credentials and the incentives of the credential issuers.
Mm-hmm.
So the stuff you're talking about around like prestige and nicheness,
Mm-hmm.
coupled with the fact that it's just very difficult to impossible to create new credentials, right?
Why would you say? What do you mean it's difficult or impossible?
So the infrastructure around learning
Mm-hmm.
is centered around existing credentials. It is structured so essentially to favor the incumbents because the things that it is useful to learn and to communicate are the things that people will receive, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
if you're going to be structuring your educational journey, you're going to do it in such a way that it's legible to the rest of the world.
Yeah.
Um,
So like
and
the
that means,
historicity of it is what gives it the value, and so like if you wanted to create something
yeah,
new, the sheer fact that there hasn't been certification for it before means people don't actually have some sort of like base to like kind of this is actually a proper certification of like uh performance or service or ability.
which means there's no way for the formal educational infrastructure to interface with that thing, right?
Okay.
It exists. And that's, I mean, it's not impossible. New fields arise all the time. And it's a
Mm-hmm.
thing that happens on the fringes in communities. And then over time, that gets legitimized and brought into the academic fold, right? But that's an extremely inefficient process. And it means that the infrastructure that people are supposed to primarily use for learning is falls extremely short if you have to go to these fringes
Mm-hmm.
to actually engage in whatever things it is you want to engage in.
Interesting.
Yeah, so that was kind of the big idea here is like the characteristics of the credentialing system define a very large portion of the characteristics of the educational system broadly, right? So because credentialing works the way it does, that trickles down into the structure of high schools
Mm-hmm.
and the structure of a classroom itself. And if you wanted to have a much broader range of educational structures, a much larger diversity of the ways people can organize to learn together,
Mm-hmm.
you need a credentialing system that supports that. And the sort of
The credentialing system that also properly incentivizes like a change that would lead towards that.
yeah, that too, right? That allows for novelty in some ways and allows for growth.
So essentially, what you're trying to do in like Hyperlink Academy, because you're saying you're not right now doing credentialing, it's kind of like reverse engineering, like from the point of like this is how people want to learn, this is how people want to congregate and develop new ways of learning, in and then get from there go in the direction of like properly aligning how you get these credentials with what people were attempting to learn in the first place or
Yeah,
certify in the first place.
that's pretty much it, right?
Cool. Glad I understand.
Yeah, we were doing it the other way around with Fathom, which was how can we make a credentialing system that lets people learn in all the different ways that they want and then certify it.
Uh-huh.
And then at the end of the day, we realized like we had this credentialing system, but nobody wanted to use it because
Yeah.
what are they going to do with it? Yeah, and so Hyperlink, at least in this stage, seems like much more sanely oriented.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we'll see how that plays out.
How did you like market this? Did you like go around to
Um,
school saying like the way you guys are learning is bullshit?
no, I mean, interacting with schools always seemed terrible, so very much avoided the K through 12 market
Mm-hmm.
entirely. I think there were some conversations I had around that. The answer for like how do I market this for Fathom was extremely poorly and kind of not at all.
Uh-huh.
For Hyperlink, we've I think taken a much more sensible approach in
Mm-hmm.
that we're still not interacting with schools directly, right? We are a school, we're a place people come to learn, but there are lots of people already engaging in sort of
Do you guys have
self-directed
a
learning.
physical location?
No, I mean all three of us are based here in Brooklyn, but
Mm-hmm.
we're not like none of the courses
Yeah.
have any ties to that, and we're not really planning on doing that anytime soon.
Mm-hmm.
Like we think there's really something like learning online can be fundamentally better than learning in person, or rather, it is a superset of learning in person. So that's definitely what we're interested in exploring. Well, so if and when we have any physical components, they will be part of the broader network, not the primary thing that's going on.
Do you think the traditional way of like learning in schools is almost is going to be dead soon? At least maybe at like the university level, because so many things of like so many college classes, you can get so many certifications online. You can get so many. You can learn anything you want basically over the internet. Honestly, like a high school education is starting to become like outdated in the way that you go about learning like algebra or you go about learning U.S. history.
Yeah. I mean, so what would you describe as the most important traits of a traditional? Because on a broad level, I think universities are going to stick around for a very right. At least the top 1% of them just are incredibly long-lived institutions, and I wouldn't bet on them like
But
disappearing.
but the I think one of the reasons I mention it is because like the cost of higher education in the states especially has like
Yes.
skyrocketed, and like especially like now that we've seen during the pandemic, people they can do learning at these universities like without having to pay for room and board, without having to pay all these stupid
Yeah.
activity fees that like most people don't actually participate in a lot of the
Yeah.
student organizations and shit. Is the value still there really of like having to sit in a class for 50 minutes and then like
Yeah. I mean, I think we're definitely going to see a large shift in the structure and reach of like undergrad programs,
mhm.
right? There's definitely going to be uh, changes there. I don't even,
Because like
I don't
liberal
know.
arts is dying across the country.
Yeah, and I want to bet like that. I mean, I would like to say that I imagine that it'll be less prevalent, but
Hmm.
honestly, I don't know if there are any meaningful alternatives to it yet, right?
Hmm.
Like, uh, as a young person, like going into post high school education,
Hmm.
uh, I don't know if, yeah, I don't know the stats on if enrolls in undergrad programs have been going up, but they certainly have been trending that way for a really long
Uh-huh.
time. And I don't know if, as a general like society, there are clear pathways to like if you're not doing that, this is what you should be doing
Hmm.
instead, right? Like, there's a very strong monopoly position there where it's like this is just the thing that you do,
Yeah.
and that takes I think that can crumble really fast, right? Like all it takes is it's essentially an erosion of trust in that like if I do this thing, this will uh, guarantee me or lead me into X kind of life and
Hmm.
career, and that trust that is the case can disappear really quickly. So I can definitely see undergrad programs changing. I think the university as a whole is a lot larger than just
A lot
undergraduate
more
programs, though.
entrenched. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. I mean, they're just really durable institutions. Some universities are some of the oldest like institutions we have that have persisted at all,
Hmm.
right? Um, and so it's certainly possible that like the modern era has fundamentally changed their structure. Like uh, there's been a basically huge explosion in the number of administrators at all educational institutions,
Hmm.
from universities to like kindergartens. There's just an incredible number of management and administration people in these
Hmm.
institutions now, and that is a fundamentally new thing, which points to relatively large scale changes in the way these institutions work in the last 50, 100 years.
When you say how they work, do
And
you mean kind of how they're like incentivized to kind of like move people through it?
no, I mean how they're internally organized, right?
Hmm.
So basically, what I was saying earlier is that like these universities have been around a long time. They've obviously are good at being around for a long time, and so as a general rule, it seems fair to assume that they'll be around for a while longer. And then the counterpoint to that is something certainly seems to have changed relatively drastically in the last, I don't know, 60-ish years in how they're organized and how they behave. And so maybe the assumptions on their longevity no longer hold, in the sense that if they're operating differently, organized differently, and are behaving differently, you can't assume that they're going to keep existing the same way that they always have.
I mean, the availability of like the internet and like technology around it. I think one of the like more interesting things I've seen was this. I can't remember what the project's called, but it's essentially like full classrooms conducted in VR, and like in the software you're able to like you can reorganize students, you can mute them. It's like operating Zoom in that way, but like you can bring in like fully animated like dinosaurs. You record the entire classroom, so if you weren't in class, you can watch the entire recording. If there was some sort of like dispute between students, the teacher could just like watch the entire thing, like whatever they were fucking whispering to each other. You can put on like avatars. I think like books and stuff are also like uploaded to it. So the idea is getting rid of like a lot of the operating costs of schooling, of like maintaining a classroom, making sure that classrooms are supplied, making sure that like all the students have like up-to-date books, and that they're in workable condition. And like essentially you pay for like a $500 like an Oculus Rift or something, and you have full access to like to school trips, to recorded classrooms. Uh, you can do surgeries and shit.
That's wild. Wait, so is this a thing that's going on?
Right now, yeah.
Okay.
Let's see if I can find it. Yeah, I'm hoping if I look up VR classroom, I'm hoping if I look up VR classroom, it's not going to come up as like a weird porn thing.
I mean, I think there's lots of like, to me, the difficult problems here are the like larger infrastructural level, right? Like on a classroom level, there's definitely a lot of really interesting things you can do to organize how people learn and reach more people there. But the tricky things come in how do you take, a single classroom experience and turn that into an educational system, right? The same way like high school is not defined by what it is like to be in a class, but it's this larger system of how classes are organized, how you move between classes, and like what the entire shape of that educational journey looks like. So what does that larger system look like in the post?
Yeah, but I think what we're also like kind of finding is that a lot of like the traditional ways that we've been doing school have been not great, like both in work and in education. I think there have been like studies that like a 4-day week, you're going to get way more done and you're going to retain more of your knowledge. And like, same thing with like work, you get more accomplished and you'll feel better rested and like more fulfilled in your work.
Yeah, definitely. There's so many like just little fundamental issues with the structure. My larger scale thing here, I think, is that I think the reason those things exist and they've persisted for so long is essentially because the educational institutions or like state-based education has a monopoly on learning thus far, right? And because they have a monopoly, they can do whatever. There's essentially no pressure to change. And so these very fundamental inefficiencies can persist forever, even if they are directly opposed to the supposed purpose of the institution, right? If you are a learning institution, making people essentially
an affordable alternative,
less cognitively able by making them wake up at like 8 a.m. when they're teenagers is fundamentally opposed to your purpose as a learning institution. But the way that they get around that is by equating learning directly with the institution. So like instead of being a place that you go to learn, it's you go to learn by going to a school. And then you can get away with anything, right? It doesn't matter how inefficient the action is fundamentally tied to your existence as an institution.
I mean, yeah, technically, so like schooling has historically always been like like a compound military and like religious assimilation, I guess, into society. Like the whole idea behind like school uniforms and like learning to read. Those are fundamentally military and religious exercises. And in terms of like entrenchment in the American fabric, the military and religion are as deep back as you can go.
For sure. Yeah. I should mention the spiel I just did on like institutions equating their purpose with themselves
Hmm.
is a like I'm getting that from Ivan Illich and Deschooling Society broadly, which are his works in that book like definitely really influenced the way I think about
What
educational
was the book
institutions
called?
broadly. Deschooling Society
Uh-huh.
by Ivan Illich. Yeah,
Ivan Bilic.
Illich.
Illich.
Illich. Yeah.
I'm trying to make an actual conscious effort to check out recommendations from my guests.
Nice. That would probably be the big go-to one, I think, for like education
Hmm.
systems broadly. For education and computers, I really liked Mindstorms by Seymour Papert, which is um, about broadly how children can learn with computers, and more specifically about like I don't know if you ever used Scratch or uh, Lego, or not
I,
Lego, but
in high school, I used Microsoft Word and Microsoft
okay,
PowerPoint,
nice,
and that's about it. Maybe I used Excel once or twice in high school.
fair, yeah. Uh, and I remember seeing people make some pretty crazy things in PowerPoint, though. Like you could at some point, I don't know when it was, but they added like, or maybe they always had linking between like hyperlinks in presentation mode,
Yeah.
and then once you have links, you can do really crazy things with
Hmm.
presentations where
Link
you
him
can
to
make them
Meat Spin.
that happens too, yeah. But yeah,
When did you come to the States? When did you get to Brooklyn?
when I joined Consensus, so I went to Shanghai. That was in like
I think you said 2014.
August. No, that was 2016. So
Uh-huh.
I got started with the education stuff broadly in I think 2014,
Hmm.
and then had to finish high school. Graduated in 2016.
Hmm.
Went to Shanghai, met up with very many cool people, and eventually got hooked up with Consensus. And then like October of that year came to Brooklyn and
Been there ever
started.
since.
No, I mean I like 2016 to 2019. I think I was kind of just bouncing around everywhere. I was like here for a couple months, in Dubai for a couple months. I mean, those were the two main places I was bouncing between because
Hmm.
that's Dubai's where my family is, and then kind of just going around as well, wherever,
Hmm.
doing the like nomad thing, and yeah, that kind of. And then I settled here properly in 2019,
Are you
and
working
that
on
was
citizenship stuff?
yeah. I mean, working on it.
Hmm.
It's a long, annoying process, and it's very made even more ambiguous by the fact that like the whole immigration pipeline got absolutely fucked by COVID, and so all of
Yeah,
their
I'm there too, more or less, with my wife.
yeah. So we're in the like wait state, and it was supposed to be like I don't know 12 to 18 months or something,
Hmm.
and who knows how long it'll extend from there. So we're just kind of waiting.
Rough. When was the last time you went back to Dubai?
Must have been early 2019.
Hmm.
Yeah, like maybe May then, but I've been here since then.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's I don't know. I this is like the first time I properly live somewhere since like 2016.
Hmm.
Since like leaving home
You travel
after
much around the states at all?
not that much. I mean, I visited like Seattle, SF, Hawaii, and I think that's it. Yeah, and then I drove up through some of New York and Vermont, and actually a couple different places with my family once.
What's your favorite? What's your favorite dish in the States?
Dish in the States, man. I don't know. I have a very undiscerning palate. I like food broadly and have a very difficult time with favorites. So that's a tough one for me.
Yeah, one thing one thing I've noticed, like in a lot of the places I've been to. So I lived in China for a few years, and now I'm in Ukraine. Like the steak culture is very niche. Steak is like baseball in that it's in the U.S., it's in Central and Southern America, and it's in Japan, and that's about it.
Yeah, that matches my experience. It's a weird uh, cultural thing.
Like beef is not nearly as common everywhere else in the world, or just not as like prized and idolized as it is in the States.
Yeah, I mean the I don't know how it ranks. I'm pretty sure it's the like number one meat consumed here, right?
Probably between that and
I don't
chicken.
know. Yeah, chicken's also pretty huge, um, but that varies. I know China is like the world's largest pork consumer,
Yep, they love
right?
their pork.
They're like, yeah, and so that's the main, I guess, staple meat
Hmm.
there. Um, yeah,
I was in the Canton
I
region,
guess.
which had the the notorious reputation of they will eat anything with four legs, and then many things on two legs.
Interesting. Yeah. Did you vibe with the cuisine
Yeah,
or?
I like I'm very used to street food. I love like their barbecue. I learned to appreciate mushrooms, which I hated like before coming to China, and now I'm like regularly putting them on everything. Um, the level of spice, I feel like my spice tolerance has definitely upped a bit in the last few years. Um, yeah, I
That's
think
got to be a pretty drastic shift from that to Ukrainian food, right?
it is. They like their spiciest here is like a mild Tabasco,
Yeah.
at best. But I've tried so many different like weird things here also.
Okay.
I've become uh much more familiar with open faced sandwiches.
Okay.
Because that's like their standard sandwich. It's like an open faced sandwich. You just put on deli meats and cheeses. Uh,
Cool.
I've been having a lot of like smoked fishes and sausages and stuff. Had some good borscht. Some good. They also like their Georgian food here. Really good.
Huh. Cool.
What about
Yeah.
Dubai? What's the Dubai food like?
Uh, Dubai culture is, I don't know.
What is a
I have
person
a
from
very,
Dubai called? Are you
I have no idea.
dubious?
I mean,
Dubanoir?
the, most people just have fun with it. They're very amused
Uh-huh.
by. I've never heard an actual serious term for it. I mean, people from the Emirates are Emirati, but you
Uh-huh.
are not an Emirati because you live in Dubai.
Interesting.
Um, it's a very, I mean, the expat to national 80-10 or something, maybe less, higher than that.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's insane.
So
Dubai,
go on.
I have a very negative view broadly of Dubai and Dubai uh, culture and
Hmm.
lifestyle there, but that's definitely a strong bias I carry with me. I
Uh-huh.
was kind of very settled in Nairobi and the life there, and then kind of uprooted in like for 1 year, and so I never really learned to. Well, I
Identify.
mean, we lived in Dubai. Yeah, we lived in Dubai when I was younger, when I was like 10, for a couple of years before we moved to Nairobi. But then I also, didn't really form any strong associations.
Hmm.
And then when I lived there for my senior year of high school, I had enough time to just kind of be be annoyed by it, right? And
Hmm.
to figure out all the ways that it was not like the place I wanted to be in.
Hmm.
Um, which is not to say that it doesn't have very many redeeming qualities and interesting facts. Just I'm not the person best equipped to, uh, tell you about them.
So how many languages did you speak?
One,
English?
English. Yeah.
Mhm. Is that
I
the language that like worked everywhere you've lived?
Yeah, that's definitely the common language.
Huh.
I mean, uh, Arabic in the Middle East, uh, Swahili in Kenya.
Hmm.
Uh, my parents speak Marathi somewhat
Uh-huh.
and Hindi, but I never picked up any of those.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So ethnically, where do you identify?
My parents are from India, where they're both Goan, which is the smallest state in India,
Hmm.
and is, uh, from what I understand, culturally very different than the surrounding territories. It's where the like Portuguese landed and colonized and was a Portuguese colony,
Hmm.
and so the sort of cuisine and culture there is relatively unique, and
Hmm.
also it's one of the few majority Catholic uh,
Huh.
places in India. So I was raised Catholic, and my parents are, and
Interesting.
yeah, so yeah, it's kind of like, I don't know, minority several times removed, like going Catholics
How
are
many
minority.
how many levels derivated are you a minority?
Yeah, I know. I have a very niche cultural identity. I think
Hmm.
there's got to be a couple though.
Many ways
I'm gonna track it
abstracted.
down. Yeah. So, but I never lived in India. We visited often, and that's about kind of my experience with it. So I'm not extremely connected with directly with that kind
Hmm.
of the culture and that kind of stuff. Uh, yeah, I went to international and American schools all my life, which is why I kind of fall very naturally into an American accent
Hmm.
and sound like that, which has been overall probably a useful trait to have, especially being here now.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, yeah,
So transitioning, another one of your interests that you listed was sci-fi books.
oh yeah, for sure.
Could you list the top
I
three,
mean,
either
top
franchises
three.
or
Ooh,
individual books?
oh man, I can list a top three I'm thinking about right now. So the big one that I mention a lot because it's the one that is like the biggest distance between the amount of people that know it and the amount of people that should know it is "Too Like the Lightning" by Ada Palmer, uh, which came out in like 2016 and is this insane
Who light the lightning?
to like to TOO like the lightning,
Oh, okay.
is this insane kind of uh, murder mystery political thing set in a utopian future society that draws from a lot of history of philosophy and a lot of older ideas in its structure. And so it's this like fascinating mix of how does really big ideas like ubiquitous travel and uh, large scale advances in technology change the structure of political entities, nation states, etc. But then it's all wrapped up in this sort of very anachronistic style and philosophy. I'm not doing a great job of pitching it right now, but it is like one of the best books I've read in the last I don't know 5 or 10 years.
Okay.
It's a series, yeah. So that's definitely up there. Um, what else? Anathem by Neil Stephenson is one that comes to mind a bunch. It's a classic like Neil Stephenson book in that it's very long and kind of about very many things. Oh yeah, that's it. But it's a lot
Who
of
like
fun.
the light?
It's roughly centers around a society in which there are these math monasteries that are the like
Mathesteries.
yeah. So a whole bunch of math monks
Uh-huh.
and stuff happens in the society that these math monks have to rise to the occasion and do things to are called to action, and stuff
So
happens.
are they
It's a
monk
very
are they monks in that they're like meditating, or are they like monks in that they're just like really reclusive and they're constantly doing math?
yeah. So there. I think there is a meditating aspect, but the main thing here is the scenario. So the way that these societies work is that there are, I forget what they call them. It might be conclaves essentially, and they're
Hmm.
all structured consent with these concentric kind of, not literally concentric walls, but they're structured concentrically. There's
Uh-huh.
a outer region, inner region, inner region, and the way they work is that the gates between each region only work open at various different intervals.
Hmm.
So the outer gate opens once every year, the inner gate once every 10 years, the inner gate once every 100 years,
Uh-huh.
and then the innermost once every 1,000 years. Um, and so you can move inwards at any time, but you can only come out at the interval that the things open at.
Huh.
So
So is the objective to
basically,
get in and then get out?
no, I mean, the objective is to do the work that you want to do, right?
Uh-huh.
The people are called to research these things or called to this lifestyle, and you kind of move into the level that you want to commit to this
So
life,
like
right? Are
what
you?
level of math is there at like the deepest level? Is it like
It's a little bit ambiguous, right? Because they haven't. You can only go in, but no one can come out except every 1,000 years.
huh?
So there's like lot of mystery about what happens in the
A lot of skeletons, I
millennium.
imagine.
One potentially, yeah. I think there's limited communication for like logistical purposes between them.
Uh-huh.
So they're
Oh,
pretty
so
sure
they're
that people are alive in there.
oh, okay. So it's not like it's not
But
like a permanent labyrinth thing and
yeah,
you have to subsist
there's
off of ones and zeros. Figure it out.
no, there definitely is like kind of this the metaphysics of that book get really interesting.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah,
What's that one? What's this one
it's
called?
Anathem.
Anathem.
Yeah, I think a through line is I really enjoy world building broadly and interesting societies, right? Um,
Neil Stephenson.
Neil Stephenson, yep. Yeah. And a third, I don't know. It's something I read like recently.
Would you say that there's any sort of like prevailing like philosophical things that you've kind of like noticed yourself kind of gravitating towards?
Philosophical things. I don't know. I don't have any sort of theories of everything that I necessarily subscribe to in like morals or philosophy. Um, yeah, I think there's definitely like a lot that just kind of osmosis is in from reading these different things.
Hmm.
Uh, I definitely feel like I've been really influenced by a lot of the sci-fi and fantasy books I've read over the years.
Hmm.
Like a really big one that I'm always a little hesitant to talk about is Ender's Game, that I think had a really big impact on me as a kid.
Ender's Game.
Um, by Orson Scott Card.
Yeah, I've definitely heard the title.
Yeah, he's kind of an awful person and has very openly embraced a lot of like fundamentally bigoted views, which makes it a little uncomfortable to like have been really impacted by his most famous work.
And people like Michael Jackson and R. Kelly still, so
Yeah, I mean, I definitely can't say that I like Horse and Sky Card, but the book I think like had a really big impact on just a lot of different things. So I think a really great short
hmm
novel. But yeah,
yeah, I'd say like it's interesting to me the success of, just on the topic of sci-fi, like just like the, I'm not very deep into like the more peripheral sci-fis, but like with how Star Wars is like lore and the story of like the light side, the dark side of the Force, the warrior monks. It very much like plays into, like very well into, I think, like both the aesthetic and the spiritual desires of a lot of like Western audiences. The A lot of people have kind of craved this like pseudo like Brahma kind of everywhere force that through certain connections with your like inner self you're able to like manipulate the world around you and turn into ghosts, and for some reason like Carrie Fisher can like survive the vacuum of space despite like
Yeah,
never showing any sort of ability to use the force whatsoever in the other six movies.
yeah. I mean, I feel like those Star Wars in particular, sort of in my mind, transcends sci-fi a little bit, or not
It,
transcends, but just is playing a different game, right? It's just like essentially
it's like what?
mythology. It's just modern.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so this like drawing from the same kind of things you're talking about, and also from I think a lot of Western mythology, and it's just the the same archetypical stories
Hmm.
rendered in this
I mean, they use the
sci-fi
virgin
palette.
birth.
I mean, yeah,
It was
you
birthed by the
kind of just
midichlorians.
it's yeah, it's been interesting seeing that franchise continue after hibernation for however many years
Hmm.
after Disney bought it.
I think it's just like really
So
sad to me. Like one, it is so like culturally significant, and like it speaks to so many people about like their place in the universe. But at the same time, the franchise is just so clearly meant to sell toys. Like that was the thing it excelled at, and that was the thing that like the ultimate direction of it went towards
yeah,
selling toys to kids over kind of like having an otherwise meaningful message.
absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's interesting how those things intersect, right? Like
Hmm.
how the commercialization of childhood and everything intersects has a direct through line to largest narratives
Hmm.
that we subscribe to today, the biggest stories. That probably wasn't well. I don't know. That seems kind of novel, right? Like, was there a point in time in history at which um, preeminent fiction of the time was like so directly accessible in, or not even accessible, but so like intertwined in people's people's lives in that like I don't know a
Well,
kid
also
like
like
hearing the
I'd say like the speed at which the mythos was created. So I mean, like we waited like 20 years for it to like end poorly. 20, 30 years for it to end poorly. But I mean, beforehand, like all the stories like Paul Bunyan, Achilles, uh,
yeah
like all these like local legends had to have been created and like exist hundreds, if not thousands of years in the past. And like the ones
totally
that really stuck had to have been like institutionalized, and like this is Shakespeare, this is Homer. Like now
and
it's like these are things everybody can see, everybody can like have their take on it.
yeah
uh
and it happens in like
yeah.
10 20 years, right? uh,
And so like
yeah
I really wonder how long these stories that are like so culturally significant, how long they're gonna really like last and be super significant, especially if
totally
there are these like big retcons that are just like like influenced by where they bought out by like
yeah
by Disney.
absolutely. The thing that blew my mind with this most recent Star Wars saga
Hmm.
was that like how cavalier they seemed to be with letting the directors do like whatever they wanted with like it really seemed like there was no coordination between uh JJ Abrams, Rian Johnson, and then JJ Abrams again.
Hmm.
Like I guess just Rian Johnson in the middle. It like actually seemed like Disney was like, you know, figure out what you want to do with this movie, and we'll figure it out afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
And then they just like kind of dealt with it afterwards, which
And
is an insane thing to do with a franchise that big.
yeah, there was really a lot. There was a very big like thematic dissonance between the three different movies. I mean, you could say that
Yeah,
same thing also for like the original three. And honestly, it's kind of weird to say, but the prequel trilogy had like the most narrative consistently like weird uncomfortableness going on
yeah,
of the three
I believe it.
trilogies. Of the trilogy of trilogies, it was like the most narratively consistent.
Yeah, the thing that I love, like, the thing that entertained me the most about the new, like a direct refutation to a lot of the things hinted at in the first one, and
Hmm.
then the third one, they're just like, nope, forget about that. We're doing those anyway. Like, it really seems like a conversation between Rian Johnson and J.J. Abrams, where he's
Yeah.
like trying to subvert it, and then they're like, no, you failed, and we're just gonna do what we thought we were gonna do anyway, and it's
Hmm.
gonna suck.
Yeah. So like, I'd say like some of like the bigger like literary culturally significant universes. So of like that of Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, and like Harry Potter. Like they
Yeah,
were all they all kind of manifested. So Lord of the Rings was already well established. Was already like the quintessential Middle Earth.
I mean, like invented fantasy, right?
Yeah,
Or
Star Wars was created, and then it had its like a huge following, and eventually it had to keep creating this new material,
yeah,
and eventually changed hands, and so its mythos got like convoluted that many times, and then Harry Potter, it evolved and finished within like this one time span. Hopefully, what's her face? Um,
Roll, J.K.
Rolling.
Rowling.
Hopefully she fucking stops because it was good. It was good, and then she ruined it, and then she continues to ruin it. And the question is she going to keep ruining it?
Like, why would you stop? You know, like if you,
Because she made enough money. Stop.
I don't know, that hasn't stopped anyone else before. Like, I mean, I
I,
guess there's a minority of people who just quit when they've, but at some point it becomes, your identity, and you have to reckon with the
I mean,
fact
I
that,
think right now she's having the issue of like ego, of just like she wants to still be the moral high ground for everything when she's just constantly tripping up on creating new stories that fail like spectacularly.
yeah, I mean,
Uh,
it's got to be
I don't know, just
a,
do
a
it.
a pretty unique psychological position to be in, right? uh, to be so directly connected to, like, or to feel like you made this thing that had such an impact. Like, it takes a certain, uh, like, I don't know if it would be easy to separate myself from that if I
Mhm.
was in that position. I
Yeah, I get,
uh,
I know, I get that.
I mean, I think it's definitely the right thing to do, but it takes in probably a non-trivial amount of psychological maturity that
But then
who
she
knows how many
also,
people can muster.
man, she also did that like other book to prove that she's not trans. She writes a book where like the murderer is a man pretending to be a woman, and
Yeah. uh, yeah, she's. I mean, a lot of authors, or yeah, she's definitely not the best. Or I think the fan base has done a pretty good
Mhm.
uh, job of separating her out from
there there's
their
a
connection to
there's a
the.
deep concerted effort to eliminate
Yeah,
her from everything. It's like the reverse of Konami with Hideo Kojima and like the Metal Gear Solid games.
where the fan base will flock to him no matter what.
Yeah, absolutely.
Uh,
And as much as
yeah,
Konami just tries to like run his name into the ground, uh,
yeah,
like people know that he's just like narratively consistent and just like that avant-garde of a game creator.
yeah. Man, I speaking of all these like large endearing franchises, I feel like the whole games industry is sort of like reaching a critical threshold where it could produce. I don't feel that it has yet, but that it could produce a franchise on that great scale. Uh,
I mean,
as
Mario, Zelda. Metal
Yeah,
Gear.
I mean, I think they're a big deal, but I don't know if they're like Star Wars in cultural reach yet. You know,
Hmm.
maybe. I mean, you could make a case
Pokemon.
for a lot of them. To be fair,
Pokemon
Yeah,
Mario
Pokemon's up
are super sellers. Personally,
there.
to me, as far as like a personally informing or like a personal moral code informing mythos. Like I love the Legend of Zelda mythos. They really don't do a good job of like carrying it out through the rest of the games. But like in Ocarina of Time, where they've got like the three goddesses,
Yeah.
um, and like the creation mythos there, I thought that was pretty uniquely profound. And then like the whole mythos in or not mythos, but like the through line in the Metal Gear franchise of like personal agency in a world that's like
Mm.
increasingly becoming like more about uh, funding a war economy.
I
And,
mean, yeah. I definitely feel that like video games have had sort of are incredibly powerful mediums. I
mhm,
just think like well, actually no, I don't. Maybe I'm measuring it by the wrong scale. Pokemon's definitely had a reach. I just feel like Pokemon hasn't identified like, co-opted people's identity or not co-opted, but integrated with people's identities as much as like uh, Harry Potter has or
mhm.
Star Wars. Right? It hasn't become so fundamental to this
Like people's
story everyone knows.
existence.
Yeah.
They haven't hit like there hasn't been like a video game Bible yet.
Yeah. Maybe I don't know. Then Fortnite definitely seems to be getting pretty
Oh fuck
fundamental to a lot of kids'
fuck
existence.
Fortnite.
I mean, it's undeniably like they
I'd
got
say
something
like
there.
my problem. So like I love video games. I love like video game culture. There is very much though this like there are the people who follow franchise, follow story, follow like lore very deeply. And so I'd say like there's like part of like the Dark Souls crowd and like the maybe like Five Nights at Freddy's crowd who have like this deep, valuable, like well contained lore. And then there's like the part of it, the video game world that is like competition, and that is what will sell, what will make me a successful channel on YouTube,
Mm.
what pulls spectatorship, what, and it's very much like this sport driven uh motivation, and
Yeah.
that's like I'd say they're both legitimate, but like one to me has more intrinsic value in like this will carry on beyond. But I don't know. It's the
Yeah.
same way that like
So
you could say certain artwork is valuable for its cultural significance, but then there is artwork that is marketing, that this is going to sell at this time and this is going to
yeah.
have track like dollar sign values.
So on the opposite side of that, that's where you mentioned like lore as this the fundamental thing here.
Mhm,
Is that one of the things that most like matters to you in video games
mhm.
broadly, like the stories, the narratives, the world.
Yeah,
Is that like
yeah, yeah.
yeah, interesting? Because I don't know. I've never been a very lore heavy gamer, but I'm definitely not a competition heavy gamer, right? Like
Mhm,
the large scale like spectacle style of it doesn't really appeal to me.
mhm,
Nor does like very like competitive FPSs and things like that.
mhm.
But the neither does so much or at least I in a lot of games the lore has felt I think yeah, a lot of games aren't too great at writing. They haven't figured out how
Yeah.
to. There's definitely like I think Metal Gear's a good
I mean,
counterexample
there's
there.
certainly a
But
lot of those like great games, like the Resident Evil games are great for like they're just fantastic. They're really fun. Tetris is fun. Pac-Man is
yeah,
fun. You're not necessarily competing with people. There there is absolutely like value also in that. Just this is a great way for me to spend my time and like relax.
I've been reading. Let me see if I can get it out of here.
Mhm.
This book that is currently stuck in this bag called "Games: Agency as Art." which basically makes the argument that the fundamental thing about the games as a medium is that they engage with agency.
Yes, I 100% agree with this. Okay, I need to check this out. Games agency as art.
And then sort of makes a case for how they manipulate agency, right? Like how it actually is when you're asking the player to adopt different, what they call like modes of agency, different goals and different rules, etc. And then what the societal benefits, or not societal, but what the benefits are, right? What can you achieve with agency as a medium that you can't achieve with anything else?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, it's really, it's a pretty fascinating perspective on it.
And there's this where also the fun can kind of interfere with either story communication or just kind of like the way you're playing doesn't feel connected with the what you're doing in the game. It's called ludonarrative dissonance.
Yeah, that's a great one.
And there's a lot of like game design that's now kind of like focusing on the interaction between what's happening in the game and like how you're playing it. And I think that's one of the ways that like specifically like Hideo Kojima and the Metal Gear Solid games, they're very uniquely playing with each other. The fact that like in the first Metal Gear, one of the ways that you needed to like progress the story was to look at the back of the CD case that you purchased, the physical CD case that you purchased. Which also incidentally was a way that they prevented people from pirating the game.
Yeah. Yep.
But yeah, the way that it actually physically manifests your interactions with the game beyond just like, digital, physical traction,
Yeah. I think there's a really interesting one of the things I like most about this book is that so my previous model of games, right, before thinking about this as like agency as the fundamental primitive, was this idea that like they're composed of very many interacting systems, right? Games are narrative systems, gameplay systems, different rules, all these different interlocking systems, rule sets, and interactions, etc., that together produce a thing that the player interacts with that responds to them. And one of the really interesting things is how a game can integrate all of its systems. Are they working well together? Are they against each other? And this like agency framing kind of shifts it a little bit in that it says, sure, the systems might be the mechanism by which the game designer is creating something, but what they are creating is a specific agential experience.
Yeah.
And what matters is how agency, what changes, like what are the mode of agency that the player adopts, which I thought was relatively novel, at least to me.
I think one of like the more profound utilizations of like this your agency and like the experience that you're kind of creating by your actions is like in horror games. The way a lot of horror games are now trying to I mean horror has always been I think a good frontier for like experimental utilizations of like the viewer and the artwork. And like, certain games where like if you listen very closely, you'll hear like things whispering in the background. If you walk backwards through a hallway because you're fucking scared, you'll hear things that are like creeping behind you, and it just makes the experience that more intense. And like so, there's a lot of those ones that are related to the audio visual interaction with the player. But then there's also ones that are very decision based, so like the Mass Effects and like Undertale, where like you can choose like the way you choose to be more of a villain or more of like a righteous butthole affects how you how the story plays out and the relationships that build with characters.
Yeah, I'm like I always had a interesting. I've like always found it way more accessible to play horror games than like watch horror movies because of the experience of like agency, right? Like when it's something that you could.
I'm personally fucking terrified of a lot of scary games.
Yeah, I haven't played that many, so and it's also been years. The one I played the most was like the first Amnesia game.
Hmm.
Uh,
Dark Descent.
yeah, and I don't know. I like very much don't vibe with horror movies,
Hmm.
but that was like very like it was still scary, right? But it was a very accessible kind of scary for
Hmm.
me for some reason. Um, yeah,
Yeah, that's the one where like as you see scary things, it affects your sanity meter or whatever,
Sanity. Yeah,
and then
and
you would
then
experience more horror depending on how you played.
it was all just like things emerging from the dark and
Hmm.
exploring poorly lit environments.
Yeah, you have to
And
find
it was,
matches and shit.
yeah, and your lights would go out all the time. Yeah, it was a good time. But uh, I get the feeling that horror games have advanced a lot since.
They've definitely over the years had to like kind of teeter over that fence of like how much of this game uh how difficult is the game versus how obscure are we allowed to make the rules that
Mm,
govern the game. Because if like you die every 30 seconds because you don't understand the rules of how the game operates, and like this like it being scary is obfuscated by the fact that it's just fucking frustrating.
yeah, I think
Uh,
there's been a lot of really interesting stuff happening in like difficulty modulation in games
mhm,
lately, where there's been the previous sort of ethos seemed to be like, this is how the game works, and you got to play it how we want it to play it.
mhm,
Whereas now the prevailing direction seems to be like, here are all these levers that you pull to modulate your experience,
mhm,
uh, and you're probably going to get something out of it no matter what. Like
mhm.
the big example in my mind is this game Celeste, which was like a
Oh yeah, yeah, the
indie
platformer.
game. Yeah, 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 and it had a assist mode, which lets you like tweak a whole bunch of different things
Hmm.
to you can if you pull all the sliders. Like it lets you, have extra double jumps or put the entire game at like 50% speed. So it's like a Twitch platformer, right? So like one false
Yeah, yeah.
step
It's
can
like
fuck you up.
a
So if you're going at
Super Meat Boy.
yeah, yeah. But if you're going at 50% speed, it becomes way more accessible.
Hmm.
And I think, this is a really interesting example of fundamentally the game designers made the game to be punishing, right? They wanted you to die and respawn and
Hmm.
have that whole Super Meat Boy-esque loop going on. But if they add this lever that like you can say either this is too hard for me or I actually don't care, I'm not having it. I just want have the satisfaction of beating each level, platforming it, and progressing in the narrative. That is an experience I can have, and I can make that choice for myself.
Hmm.
Uh, it's really interesting. Hades is the other really neat example of like a difficulty modulation system
The
where,
Hades,
uh,
the recent roguelike
yeah,
game.
yeah. So their system is you can turn on God mode, which doesn't make you un. Uh, it makes the game exactly the same, except every time you die without completing a run, it gives you a little stat boost.
Oh,
So basically, it's self-balancing in the sense that like it'll just consistently beating the game and winning
sorry. Can you
on each
repeat that?
run.
Your audio cut out for a second.
So it works by essentially every time if you have God mode on, every time you lose a run, because roguelite, so you're just doing runs over and over again.
Yeah, yeah.
So every time you lose a run, it'll just give you a little stat boost until, and it'll just keep doing that every time you die prematurely until it like
Do they
balances
tell
out,
you?
and you're
Do they tell you while that's happening?
yeah. So
There's like
the
a
mode
there's
that
like a
you're
visible change.
I mean, they'll definitely say it every time you die. They'll say
Uh.
like plus. It might be just to health, honestly, or health and damage
Hmm.
that they give you the boost to. But it's just really interesting because the mechanism. If the game was only about beating the game,
Hmm.
that probably wouldn't work out, right? Then it would be no fun. You could just set your stats to whatever you want and you beat it. But because the game is designed around these loops that you're meant to be playing it again and again, and also there's this entire narrative and world you're interacting with, it becomes suddenly this much more accessible experience.
Hmm.
Yeah,
There's
and it
a
seems so.
I think there's a like a really good example of that, but I think more effective is in like widely regarded as like one of the best games ever made, Resident Evil 4. They did essentially that same thing where like if you're performing really well, they'll so when you start a new game, you start in just like normal mode, and as you're playing the game, it self modulates depending on your performance. So if you're dying,
Yeah.
the game becomes easier. They'll remove enemies. They'll give you more bullets. And then if you're playing really well, they'll add more enemies. They'll reduce the amount of bullets that you're finding in the game. And they don't tell you that they're changing the game as they do this. So you're
Yeah,
complete.
it feels like you're, yeah.
Yeah. And like if you're a really hardcore player and you're like, oh, I'm super badass at this game, like and then you find out that it's been like modulating and making things easier. It's kind of a pain in the ass. But the fact that you don't know from the get go is in itself, I think it's pretty cool. It's a good way of like still making the person feel like they're earning their wins, however they get to those wins.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's an interesting tension, right? In between trying to create this, the ideal experience,
Mhm.
right? The ideal versus like letting the player choose.
Yeah.
Um, I I think I come down more on the like it's interesting to let the player choose because
Hmm.
people have much more rich information about like what they want
Hmm.
than. But then again, there's always some utility in just like submitting yourself to a particular vision and a particular experience. I remember reading about the I think implementation of that when
Hmm.
it's because they let you pick a difficulty level right at the start,
Yeah,
and then
there's normal difficulty, and if you beat it, you get professional difficulty. And professional is just like all of the
yeah,
slider is turned all the way to the max. I
gotcha.
don't know if it
But
goes down in professional if you keep dying.
the way I think it might have been a different game, but the idea was that there's uh, they let you pick between some, and then there's actually gradations. And so when you pick this level, it'll at most boost you up to like this level, and at least drop you down to this level.
Hmm.
So it still like maintains a band. Basically, I think there's a very large space to explore in game design of combining intentional user parameters for the game
Hmm.
with design systems, right? So extending the player agency to
Hmm.
setting the parameters of the game and instead of just uh, while playing the game, essentially.
There's also the I know in like Doom is also notorious for like when you choose your difficulty, it's like it doesn't go like very easy, medium, hard, super hard. It goes like I'm a fucking baby. I want this to
Yeah,
please
yeah,
baby me, and then it goes to kill me or like hurt me, fuckloads, shove it up my ass,
yeah.
man. uh,
That's
and,
definitely.
and then like
I
in
recently read the. Oh no, go ahead.
yeah, sorry. In the newest South Park game, the difficulty scaler goes with your skin color, and so like being like being like pale white, it's the
Oh,
easiest difficulty, and super hard difficulty it makes you a black guy. Uh, it's
yeah,
pretty.
uh,
I wouldn't say it's controversial, but I think it was a funny way of kind of like, you know,
it's like South Park, right? That's
yeah.
the kind of joke they make. Yeah, I recently read the a I don't know if it's a biography, but the like retelling of the ID Software early years when they were like coming together and creating Doom,
Hmm.
and the like that the culture that is very prevalent in those difficulty scales and prevalent right from the start. And so it's really interesting to see how like I always wonder how much video games is fundamentally tied to that culture. Like why did that happen? Why did games get so caught up in super like rage machismo
Hmm.
hyper aggressive thing when conceptually like you can make games about anything. That's not necessarily why. So why did the medium like
Uh,
get
Kind
so
of
invested in
gravitate towards like the oh, you gotta be the best. You gotta be super good at this, and then like you're a badass for doing it this way.
yeah, exactly, right? Like I mean, not to say that there aren't plenty of games that totally go in the opposite direction, and there always have been,
Hmm.
but like at the public consciousness scale, that definitely seems to be the biggest games or something like
I
that.
think it has a lot to do with like the fact that in many cases games are kind of a power trip. In real life, you don't get to like shoot people, kill the bad guy. You don't get to explode the asteroid, kill the dragon. So
Mm.
in being able to like do these things and feel really powerful, and do it like with with difficulty, but still be able to do it. It makes you feel uniquely powerful, uh, in a way that you know softer things, smaller achievements don't really.
Yeah.
Like even with games that are still like more casual and like more just kind of relaxing, like Animal Crossing or like these like farm simulator stuff. Like
Yep.
you're still getting like more instant gratification of like, oh, I grew these carrots immediately. My character gets these benefits. I feel nice without having to like worry too much about the turmoil. In a lot of ways, it's like a power trip of I do this, I do X, I always get Y.
Yep. It definitely is like a very concentrated, right, time
Mm-hmm.
scale. It lets you have achievements that would not exist on a daily time scale or on a daily scale. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I think there's a lot to learn from, or there's still a lot of room for video games as a medium to grow, and also like a lot of things to learn from the way they are structured for lots of other applications. Like I think games are a much more broadly meaningful structure than just like gaming. You
Mm-hmm.
know, I think they extend to lots of a huge amount of different
Yeah,
things.
right now there's definitely that battle of like gaining legitimization as a medium and as like a an industry, because it's always been like infantile. It's always been like a childish thing to do. Um, but now that it's like we're just one of like the largest media industries in the world,
Yeah,
it
it's huge.
it but at the same time like YouTubers like they're not given recognition in general popular media. They're not given celebrity status as far as like your Brad Pitts or your Tom Cruises or
Yeah.
your Angelina Jolie's. Uh, I don't know how often people are like run up to PewDiePie and like PewDiePie. Or Jack, like apparently Jackie Chan had the issue of like people running up to him like, oh, Jackie Chan. Nobody would say his name normally. I don't know how much that happens with YouTubers, but
Yeah, I don't know.
yeah, because it's like tied with gaming. It's always been like this kid thing. Um,
I think also with like on YouTubers, there's this interest. Uh, there's just way more opportunity for someone. Like there's just way more YouTubers.
mhm,
At least that's how it seems. Than uh, and so like by virtue of this, the medium by which they are achieving celebrity,
mhm,
right? There's just going to be it's just more accessible and more prevalent, and there's
mhm,
just many more at all sorts of scales. And so one hypothesis would be like the accessibility of it would make it so that there are many more public figures like
mhm,
YouTubers, and but they're all relatively smaller. That like the age of blockbuster celebrity
mhm,
is over, where there's like one person can concentrate. Uh, I don't know, all the superstarness you could
mhm.
have a like
Well,
Michael Jackson or something
also
like that.
also a lot of the like movies and musicians, they like there is a lot of like industry behind it, and like you need to pay your dues. You need to like be members of
Yeah,
these organizations and gotten legitimacy this way before you're even considered for being in like a real big movie.
yeah, and so yeah, but I could also see the flip side in the like emerging, internet celebrity
Hmm.
space where because of the reach and because of the scale, it would theoretically be possible to have like celebrities bigger than anyone has seen before, right?
Hmm.
Like truly global, cross-cultural, massive celebrities. So it'll be interesting to see.
How that kind of evolves going forward.
Yeah,
I mean, we were having the crossovers of like Snoop Dogg and Will Smith starting gaming channels and shit.
yeah, it
Uh,
definitely seems to be just merging.
and like I feel like a lot of the pushback is certainly from like the traditional media source, the traditional movie goers, like, oh, they're not proper content creators, they're not proper, like, I don't know how
Yeah.
many like 2 hour like video 2 hour video essays I've listened to from people, but like I won't watch like an hour and a half movie that costs like $5 million to make just because like
Yeah.
the story sucks or the whatever, you know.
It's a different game. Yeah. It is really, I mean, the just accessibility of media creation is fascinating. Uh, and I feel like that hasn't been like a tool used in learning environments that
Hmm.
much, right? Like uh, where it's possible for anyone to create and publish and have extremely broad reach for really anything that they create.
Hmm.
Uh, I would, I could see that changing
I know in
the way
Korea,
you would work.
I
Yeah,
know in Korea there are teachers who have celebrity status,
yeah, yeah,
like based on like YouTube channels and like their how entertaining they are as like online educators.
yeah. But like, what I have in mind is like, so in a lot of educational environments, the intermediate work is often treated as a like, right, like you'll write an essay that is your teachable grade, and then that essentially just gets tossed away. It doesn't matter. It
Hmm.
was created for the express purpose of fulfilling an requirement,
Hmm.
and it basically has no value outside of that context.
Hmm.
Um, but in the when we have all these media publishing, and so the reason you have that is because oftentimes the thing that you want to create is not something that is useful broadly, right?
Hmm.
Like how many essays on I don't know, like
Romeo and
Henry and Thoreau.
Juliet, or yeah, yeah.
Yeah, do you need people to read, right? It doesn't matter. But in this hyper networked, super niche media publishing world, where like if you can write something of some specific intersection, chances are somebody's going. Is there an opportunity for having both the material that is useful for someone to create be useful to people broadly,
Hmm.
like be a thing that you publish and that actually creates value for the world in some way, instead of being just like a useless. And then it means the work that you're doing connects to a broader context, environment, whatever, and is a much more meaningful experience. If that, yeah, that was kind of a rambly kind of thing. I think
No,
there's
I mean, it definitely makes sense. Of it does like if you more projects and essays that you had to do, like imagine just like making a video essay about like a book or like a game or a movie that you saw. I feel like that definitely has a lot more relevance, especially because there are people who do that now and have jobs
yeah,
doing that. Uh,
totally.
it definitely gives more inherent value to like the work that you're doing in school.
Yeah, and I think there's like if you take that seriously as a move you can in a educational environment, right? If you assume that the thing people should be doing is meaningfully contributing to C groups in the real world,
Hmm.
that changes how you would structure your educational environment
Hmm.
pretty drastically. Yeah,
I think the resistance to that though would be like, then everything kind of becomes like a so like it becomes more of like a competitive thing and like who's going to be innovating the most, who's going to be doing the things that have the most creative students doing the most wide reach things, and then it becomes an issue of like network, who's got the most people connected to media or
yeah.
content creators and
I
sharers,
mean, there's definitely this. I mean, goes back to the same thing of like the question between of do these hyper connected networks lead to bigger celebrities or do they just niche celebrities, right?
Hmm.
Because if it's like if the if the high if the high status thing to do is to find your and to find the that small set of people who, I mean, obviously that's not broadly high status, and I don't know if fundamentally could be. But like, if the expected thing to do in these things is to participate in the community that most fundamentally aligns with you, right? Instead of participating in the community with the broadest reach or the highest status, etc., that would be a much more healthy and accessible media environment to learn in than the alternative, where it's like, yeah, basically what you're saying, where what matters is just the learners with the highest access and basically the most resources to get the most scale, etc., and it becomes competition. Yeah.
So going forward, like what kind of like business steps are you kind of looking forward to, like in the coming years, coming months, I guess, with Hyperlink?
Business steps,
like expansion and
yeah. So the big thing we're working on right now is the fundamental infrastructure of Hyperlink, right? The things.
sorry, stop. Can you repeat that for a sec, because the audio cut out again?
Sure. The fundamental infrastructure of Hyperlink, the things that people are interacting with, the tools, is still very low tech. It is they're still just kind of interacting in a forum. They're still hopping on Zoom. And it's still very inaccessible in the sense that there's a small set of course creators who are creating courses. And there's a big separation between that person and like the average learner or the person taking a course. And where we want to get to is a place where the infrastructure is extremely accessible in the sense that anyone who is participating create a new learning structure, a new course, a new club, a new event, whatever. And that those things can all be networked with each other. So right now, every course exists as like a thing in Hyperlink, but they all broadly sit on their own. They're kind of in their own universes. And what we want is for all these courses, all these clubs, all these little structures to be connecting to each other, to be building on the outputs and resources that they create, and to be creating a broader network. And so what we're working on right now is the piece of infrastructure to allow that, to basically like, what does actual hyperlinked learning look like? And can you make a social environment for doing hyperlinked learning where you can use it individually, you can use it in, so if I'm interacting with the book, right? If I am reading that book, taking my own notes, doing my highlights, I can easily see and join a book club that is talking about that book and see the outputs of a course where that book is recommended reading and see all the different things that someone has created for that book previously.
So it's like targeted advertisement or targeted hyperlinking based on kind of like the courses that you've been learning or the subjects that you've kind of been engaging with.
Kind of. So, but you don't want to do it in kind of like personalization. Incredibly
invasive.
That's the wrong move.
Yeah.
Well, basically, just it's not even like I think there's a moral problem there, but in terms of experience, you don't want the experience of like, oh, this software is just suggesting things that I like. What you want is you want a tool that you can wield to achieve the things that you want to achieve. Right? You want it to feel like I am intentionally, not feel like, you want it to be, I am intentionally creating these links, these structures, and then I'm navigating and working with them to achieve the things that I want to achieve. I am using something that is there as opposed to being presented with something opaque.
Gotcha.
And so making the network structure really visible and accessible important to us, right? Where anyone can create these relationships and wield them instead of the relationships being like this opaque, hidden data layer that is for the developers and not for the end user, making the end user experience be essentially
empowerment
with directly the network.
Yeah. Gotcha. So I think last topic, last few minutes. So how'd you get to Mochi?
So I was at Consensus and hanging out on the 4th floor of Bogart and with kind of the set of people, and Gabe and all those guys, and kind of just having a lot of great conversations about all sorts of stuff, right? So Consensus was essentially like my college experience, right? It was post high school. I was in New York and also elsewhere, and meeting.
It was your first. It was your first steps into adulthood, quote unquote.
Yeah, and also it was just like a totally new social environment and world, right? I didn't have any connections, etc. And so it was kind of a really incredible learning environment in the sense that there were all these crazy cool people doing fascinating things, talking about all these crazy topics. And yeah, it was really something special to just be like there hanging out and talking to everybody. And so after I left Consensus, I kind of definitely missed that a lot. And then when Mochi was going on, and it's like, here are all these people who, you know, were all these people I had such a exciting time learning from and doing. Well, I mean, what's really interesting to me about Mochi is like the combination of a really interesting. So, like, there are a lot of, I don't know, if you look at the landscape of audio, right, there are a lot that largely function on the fact that there's just interesting people there, and that's why you go and hang out. But you never do things with those interesting people, right? It's just, I don't know, a space where you're all broadcasting to each other, and that's never really appealed to me online. I think there feels like there's a separation between like you do things in the real world and then you go to the internet to tell people. Whereas with Mochi, it's, you know, there are all these people here, and the structure of the place is about doing things together. And that's something, you know, we want to achieve with Hyperlink, and it's also just something that's really cool and appealing to me.
So, batch 3 recently started. Have you gotten into a journey?
I have not yet. I don't know if I like dropped off there or what happened, but I need to figure that out.
All right. Okay. Any last things you kind of want to pitch? So Hyperlink Academy. What's the website?
Hyperlink.academy.
There you
go. Yeah, if you want to make a course, or you want to run a club, or do any interesting learning experiments, Hyperlink's a good place to do it. If you want to talk about, you know, the future of collaborative learning software, that's also a thing I'm always down for. Yeah, those are the two big pitches, I think.
Dope. And your Twitter, at JRDPRR. Do you have like a Insta or a SoundCloud or whatever?
Yeah, website, awarm.space.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right. Jared, thank you for coming on. I had an awesome conversation with you.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. I had a great time.
All right, stay on, and I'll just close this out.